If you're enjoying these stories, you can support us on Patreon. There are several unique stories over there that I haven't uploaded to YouTube. Please consider supporting me on Patreon if you can. Now, let's get into the story. The Adventure of Wilson the District Messenger. I find recorded in my notebooks for the year 1889 a great number of cases which test the limits of human ingenuity, but none so uniquely reliant upon the intersection of high political intrigue and the esoteric arts as the singular affair of the district messenger, Wilson. I have had occasion to mention this case in passing, specifically when recording the grim circumstances surrounding the Hound of the Baskervilles, as an example of my friend Sherlock Holmes's capacity for intense, unyielding focus. Yet the full particulars of that June morning and the harrowing night which followed have remained sequestered in my dispatch box until now. The passage of time and the recent death of a certain European statesman finally permit me to lay the facts before the public. It was early in the month of June, and London was baking under a premature and oppressive heatwave. The air in our Baker Street rooms was stifling, heavy with the pungent aroma of Holmes's strongest shag tobacco and the faint chemical tang of the experiments he had been conducting the previous evening. The windows were thrown wide open, but no breeze stirred the heavy velvet curtains. I sat in my armchair, attempting to read the British Medical Journal, though the heat made my eyes heavy and my attention wander. Sherlock Holmes, entirely impervious to the climate, paced the room with the restless energy of a caged leopard. He was clad in his mouse-coloured dressing-gown, his pipe clamped firmly between his teeth, his sharp aquiline features drawn into a mask of profound boredom. "Crime, Watson, is as stagnant as this infernal air," he complained, pausing at the window to peer out into the dusty street. "The criminal classes of London have lost their enterprise. I have spent the morning perusing the agony columns, and what do I find? Lost lapdogs, clandestine romances of the most trivial nature, and desperate pleas for the return of misplaced umbrellas. It is a bleak landscape for a mind that craves exertion." "The heat," I suggested lazily, "is surely enough to sap the energy of even the most determined malefactor." "Pshaw!" Holmes ejaculated, turning on his heel. "True villainy knows no season. It is merely a lack of imagination. When the criminal intellect fails, Watson, the detective is left to atrophy. I was half tempted to reach for the 7% solution this morning, merely to provide my brain with some artificial stimulus, but I resolved to give the metropolis one last chance to present me with a problem." As if in direct answer to his challenge, the heavy, muffled thud of hurried footsteps sounded on the stairs. Mrs. Hudson's voice could be heard in a brief, indignant protest, followed by a frantic knocking at our door. "Come in!" Holmes cried, his eyes instantly alighting with the fire of anticipation. The door flew open, and a boy of perhaps 14 years of age stumbled into the room. He was dressed in the unmistakable uniform of a district messenger, though the pillbox hat was missing, and the tunic was heavily stained with soot, sweat, and something that looked suspiciously like blood. He was entirely out of breath, his chest heaving, his face pale and smeared with urban grime. He leaned against the doorframe, gasping for air, his wide, terrified eyes darting between Holmes and myself. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he panted, his voice breaking. "I am he," Holmes replied, his demeanour instantly transforming from restless agitation to cool, clinical observation. And you, my young friend, have run entirely from the vicinity of Whitehall, judging by the specific reddish clay upon your boots, which is currently being excavated near the embankment. You have been pursued, you have narrowly avoided a severe altercation, and you are currently in possession of a secret which you believe is a matter of life and death." The boy stared at him, his mouth agape. How did you know about the embankment, sir, and the blokes chasing me?" "The clay tells of your origin," Holmes said gently, stepping forward and guiding the boy to a chair. "The state of your tunic, the torn shoulder seam, and the frantic manner of your breathing speaks of pursuit. And a messenger boy does not bypass the local constabulary to seek out my private rooms unless he feels the official force is either untrustworthy or inadequate to the task. Watson, a glass of water, if you please, and perhaps a dash of brandy." I hurried to comply, bringing the reviving draught to the lad. He drank it greedily, coughing slightly at the burn of the spirit, but some colour soon returned to his cheeks. "Now," Holmes said, pulling up his own chair so that he sat directly facing the boy, their knees nearly touching, "tell us your name, your number, and the exact sequence of events that has brought you to 221B Baker Street in such a state of terror." "My name is Wilson, sir. Number 14 of the District Messenger Service," the boy began, his voice steadying. "I was sent on an errand early this morning, just a routine delivery to an office on Parliament Street. I had dropped off the parcel and was making my way back. To save time, sir, I cut through a narrow alleyway behind the government buildings, a dark little passage that runs down toward the river." Holmes nodded encouragingly, his eyes half closed, his fingertips pressed together in his customary attitude of intense listening. "It was quiet in the alley," Wilson continued. "Too quiet. Then I heard a sound ahead of me, a scuffling like boots scraping on the cobblestones, and a muffled groan. I crept forward and peeked around a bend in the brickwork. There was a man lying on the ground, a toff by the looks of him, silk hat rolled away into the gutter, fine broadcloth coat. But he was thrashing about, clutching his chest. "Did you see his assailant?" Holmes asked sharply. "No, sir. The alley was empty, save for him. But as I hurried up to help him, I saw why he was on the ground. There was a dagger, sir, a thin, nasty-looking blade driven right into his back beneath the shoulder blade." I shuddered. A fatal wound, no doubt. "I tried to help him up," Wilson said, tears welling in his eyes. "I rolled him over. He was a foreigner, I think. Pale skin, a sharp moustache, wearing a monocle on a gold chain that had smashed when he fell. He grabbed me by the tunic, sir. His grip was like iron. I asked him who did it, if I should fetch a peeler, but he didn't seem to understand me. His eyes were wide, staring right through me." "And what did he say?" Holmes leaned forward, his entire body rigid with focus. "That's the queer part, Mr. Holmes. He didn't speak. Blood was bubbling on his lips, but he didn't say a word. Instead, he pulled me closer, right up to his face, and he began to hum." "Hum?" I ejaculated. "A dying man humming?" "Yes, Dr. Watson. It wasn't a song I've ever heard. It wasn't a tune at all, really. Just a series of notes, hummed deep in his throat. Up and down, very fast, very specific. He hummed the whole sequence once, stopped, coughed up blood, and then stared into my eyes and hummed the exact same sequence again. Then his eyes rolled back, his grip went slack, and he died right there in my arms." Holmes sprang to his feet, his eyes blazing. "Fascinating! A dying message, not of words, but of melody. And what did you do then, Wilson?" I laid him down, sir. But then I heard a sound from the end of the alley, the scuff of boots again. I looked up and saw 2 men standing in the shadows, watching me. They had thick coats and bowler hats, and one of them had a walking stick that gleamed like metal in the dim light. When they saw me looking, they started toward me. I knew they were the ones who killed the toff, and I knew they'd kill me too. I dropped my dispatch bag and I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I knew the back alleys better than they did, so I managed to lose them near Charing Cross. But I didn't dare go to the police. The dead man was important, I could tell, and those men, they looked like professionals, sir. I remembered a boy named Wiggins who used to talk about you, Mr. Holmes. He said you were the only one to go to when the official police couldn't help. So I came here. You did exactly the right thing, Wilson, Holmes said, pacing rapidly. A foreign gentleman murdered in the shadow of Whitehall. Men of professional, perhaps military bearing, waiting to ensure his demise. And a musical message delivered with his dying breath. The implications are profound. Tell me, Wilson, are you a musical boy? I sing treble in the choir at St. Paul's, sir, the boy answered proudly. The choirmaster says I have perfect pitch. Holmes stopped dead in his tracks and clapped his hands together. Excellent! Fortune smiles upon us. Watson, do you see the chain of events? The dying man knew he could not write, knew his breath was failing, and knew his English might not be understood even if he could speak. But music is a universal language, and to stumble upon a messenger boy with perfect pitch, it is a stroke of unparalleled luck. Wilson, can you replicate the tune? I can, sir. It's burned into my head. Then wait here. Do not move. Holmes darted into his bedroom and returned a moment later carrying his beloved Stradivarius violin and a blank sheaf of musical manuscript paper. He seated himself at the table, dipped a pen into his inkwell, and looked at the boy. Whistle it, Wilson. Slowly at first, and then exactly at the tempo he hummed it. The boy took a deep breath, pursed his lips, and began to whistle. The sound that filled the room was indeed strange. As a man who appreciates a good opera and the occasional symphony, I found the sequence of notes entirely discordant. There was no melody, no rhythm that invited the tapping of a foot. It was a bizarre, leaping progression of tones, sharp, flat, rising in erratic leaps and falling in sudden, unnatural drops. It sounded less like music and more like the frantic, disjointed chirping of a mad bird. Holmes did not flinch. His pen flew across the manuscript paper, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. "Again," Holmes commanded when the boy had finished. Wilson repeated the strange whistling. Holmes checked his transcription, making 1 or 2 rapid corrections. Now, the tempo. How fast? Wilson hummed it this time, replicating the frantic, breathless pace of the dying man. Holmes tapped his finger against the table, nodding in rhythm. "Thank you, Wilson," Holmes said softly, laying down the pen. "You have done your country a great service today, though you cannot yet fathom how great." "Is it a secret code, sir?" the boy asked, his eyes wide. "It is indeed, my boy. But your part in this is done, and for your own safety you must be removed from the board. Watson, the men who pursued him saw him. They know a messenger boy was with their victim. If they are the sort of men I suspect they are, they will already be scouring the city for him. We must put him out of their reach. I can take him to my brother's house in Paddington," I offered. No, no, that is too predictable. We require the impenetrable shield of the British government. Write a note, Watson, to my brother Mycroft at the Diogenes Club. Tell him to take the boy in, to place him in one of his secure lodgings in Pall Mall until further notice. Give the boy a sovereign for a cab and instruct him to lie on the floor of the four-wheeler until he arrives. I quickly penned the note, gave the brave lad the coin and instructions, and ushered him out the door. When I returned to the sitting-room, I found Holmes standing by the window, the manuscript paper in one hand, his violin in the other. He had drawn the curtains slightly, casting the room into a dim, secretive gloom. "Well, Holmes?" I asked. "What do you make of it?" "The murdered man," Holmes said quietly, "can be none other than Count Waldemar von Rittenberg." "The Austrian naval attaché?" I cried, recognizing the name from the morning papers I had been idly browsing. "The very same. He has been in London for a fortnight, supposedly negotiating trade tariffs. In reality, Mycroft informed me in confidence that von Rittenberg was engaged in a highly sensitive transfer of intelligence. The naval balance of power in the Mediterranean is currently on a knife edge, Watson. If certain foreign fleets were to merge and occupy key strategic straits, the British Mediterranean fleet would be entirely outflanked. Von Rittenberg was a sympathiser to our cause. He had uncovered the covert sailing schedule of an Allied adversary's fleet, a massive mobilisation designed to occur in secret over the next month. "And you believe this tune—" I pointed to the paper. "Is the sailing schedule," Holmes finished grimly. Von Rittenberg was carrying the cipher in his mind. He knew he was being followed, knew an assassination attempt was imminent. When the blow fell, he transferred the only copy of the cipher to the only vessel available, the mind of a passing boy. "But how can a tune be a cipher?" I asked, staring at the chaotic smattering of crotchets and quavers on the page. "It is merely sound." "Come, Watson, you know my methods," Holmes said, a familiar gleam of intellectual triumph in his eye. "Think of the Polybius square or the Playfair cipher. We substitute letters for numbers or symbols for letters. Why not musical notes? The standard chromatic scale consists of 12 distinct pitches. A piano provides over 80. If one assigns letters of the alphabet or specific coordinates of latitude and longitude to specific musical intervals or pitches, one can sing a message that to anyone else sounds merely like poor composition." Holmes tucked the Stradivarius beneath his chin and drew the bow across the strings. The discordant notes Wilson had whistled now screamed from the violin, sharp and biting. "Listen closely, Watson. Notice the repetition of the C-sharp followed by the G natural, a tritone, the devil's interval, and here a sudden leap of a minor ninth. In a standard musical cipher, such as the one developed by the French cryptographer Porter in the 16th century, the scale is divided into 2 octaves. The first octave represents the rows of a grid. The second octave represents the columns. A 2-note sequence provides a single letter or number. Holmes snatched up his pen and began drawing a grid upon a fresh sheet of paper. He quickly populated the grid with the alphabet and a series of numerals. Let us assume von Rittenberg was using the standard German naval cipher variant, C major scale as the base, chromatic alterations indicating numerical values. For the next hour, the sitting room of 221B Baker Street became a laboratory of cryptography. Holmes played a pair of notes on the violin, paused, consulted his grid, and scribbled a letter or number. The heat of the room was forgotten. The screech of the strings and the scratch of the pen were the only sounds, save for Holmes's occasional mutters of satisfaction or frustration. I watched him with the quiet awe I had felt so many times before. His mind was a calculating engine, breaking down the abstract art of music into cold, hard mathematics. Finally, he lowered the violin. Sweat beaded on his high forehead, and his eyes were dark and serious. "You have it?" I asked. "I have it," he replied, handing me the paper. I read the transcribed text. It was a series of dates, coordinates, and naval designations. Fleet amalgamation, June 28th, Lat 35, 89, Lon 1451, Rendezvous Malta Channel, 14 dreadnoughts, silent run. "Good heavens, Holmes," I breathed, the magnitude of the text sinking in. If this fleet converges on the Malta Channel silently, they could cut off the Suez route entirely. It would be a strategic disaster for the Empire. "Indeed," Holmes said, laying the violin carefully in its case. "Von Rittenberg died to get us this information. The men who killed him are agents of the adversary. They are an elite cadre, Watson, ruthless, efficient, and well-funded, and they made a fatal error this morning. They let the boy escape. But we have the boy safe with Mycroft." "Yes, but they do not know that." Holmes walked to the window and peered through a narrow slit in the curtains. His body went rigid. "And it appears, Watson, that they are not entirely without deductive faculties of their own." I stepped to his side and looked down into Baker Street. The afternoon shadows were beginning to lengthen. Across the street, lingering near the entrance to the tobacconist, was a tall, heavily built man in a rough coat, a bowler hat pulled low over his eyes. Further down, near the corner of Blandford Street, another figure loitered, seemingly engrossed in a newspaper. "They tracked the boy," I said, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "They tracked the boy, or they made a calculated guess," Holmes replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A messenger boy fleeing a murder scene seeking help. Where would he go? The official police or the unofficial consultant? They have staked out our lodgings." "Shall I fetch the police?" I reached for my hat. Holmes caught my arm. "No. If you leave, they will know we are alarmed. Furthermore, standard constables would be massacred by men of this calibre. No, Watson, the cipher must be delivered to Mycroft so that the Admiralty can mobilise the Mediterranean fleet to intercept. But we cannot walk out of the front door with it." "Then what are we to do?" "We wait for nightfall, and we prepare for a siege." The next few hours were spent in frantic, silent preparation. Holmes summoned Mrs. Hudson, and, without explaining the full danger, instructed her to take a hansom cab immediately to her sister's house in Hampstead, insisting that the Baker Street plumbing was about to undergo catastrophic and foul-smelling repairs. Once the good woman was safely away, Holmes locked the heavy front door of 221 and threw the deadbolts. He then returned to our sitting-room and began a systematic fortification. We dragged the heavy oak dining table across the door leading to the landing. We closed and locked all the windows, drawing the heavy shutters and securing them with iron latches. Holmes even took the poker from the fireplace and jammed it through the handles of the double doors, leading to his bedchamber. "Are they truly so brazen that they would attack a house in Baker Street, in the heart of London?" I asked, as I checked the cylinder of my service revolver, the familiar weight of the weapon bringing me a grim sense of comfort. These are men who murdered a foreign diplomat in broad daylight within a stone's throw of Whitehall." Holmes replied grimly, loading his own revolver with practised ease. "They care nothing for English law. Their sole objective is to ensure that the musical cipher is never translated. They know the boy came here. They suspect I have the information. They must silence us both before morning." Night descended over London, thick and stifling. The gas lamps in the street flickered to life, casting long, distorted shadows against our shuttered windows. Inside, the heat was nearly unbearable, but we dared not light a lamp. We sat in the dark, bathed in sweat, our ears straining for any sound. The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. 10 o'clock, 11, midnight. The distant rumble of hansom cabs on Marylebone Road grew infrequent, until finally a heavy silence settled over the city. I sat in my armchair, my revolver resting on my knee. Holmes crouched by the fireplace, an unlit pipe in his hand, his eyes scanning the gloom. "Holmes," I whispered, "why have they not come at the front door?" "Because they are professionals, Watson," came his disembodied voice from the darkness. "A frontal assault on a locked door creates noise. Noise draws the police. No, they will seek a quieter ingress." "The windows?" "Too exposed to the street. Look to the architecture of Baker Street, my dear doctor. What do you know of the house next door, number 221C? "It has been vacant for a month," I replied. "The landlord is renovating." "Exactly. An empty house, unlocked windows in the rear, and what do Georgian terraced houses share?" I felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "The party walls and the chimney stacks." "Precisely," Holmes whispered. "The flues of 221B and 221C run parallel, separated by a single course of brick. In older houses, these bricks often crumble, or connecting vents are left unsealed. It is the perfect conduit for a man agile enough to navigate the soot and the dark." As if to punctuate his deduction, a faint scraping sound echoed through the room. It was not at the door. It was not at the window. It came from the fireplace. I gripped my revolver, my knuckles turning white. Holmes slowly raised his hand, gesturing for absolute silence. Scrape, thud, scrape. The sound was muffled, echoing down the brick flue. It was the unmistakable sound of a body manoeuvring within a confined space. Someone was descending the chimney of the vacant house next door, searching for the breach into our own flue. Then a soft pattering sound. Soot was falling into our grate, dislodged by the vibrations in the shared stack. Suddenly a dull crack echoed from behind the mantelpiece. A brick had been forcibly removed. The sounds of heavy, laboured breathing became audible, no longer muffled by the wall, but echoing directly down our own chimney. They were inside our flue. "Watson," Holmes breathed, his voice barely audible. "To the side of the hearth. Keep out of the direct line of fire." I moved silently, pressing my back against the wall beside the fireplace. Holmes positioned himself on the opposite side. The descent continued. The scraping grew louder, accompanied by the rustle of clothing against brick. I could see a faint greyish light filtering down from the chimney pot above, being blocked out by a descending mass. 2 booted feet suddenly dangled into the fireplace, dislodging a cloud of black soot that drifted out into the sitting-room. The man dropped into the grate with surprising agility, his knees bending to absorb the impact. He was dressed entirely in black, a soot-stained rag tied across his lower face, leaving only a pair of cold, ruthless eyes visible. In his right hand he held a long, wicked-looking trench knife, identical, I imagined, to the one that had ended the life of Count von Rittenberg. He stepped out of the hearth, scanning the dark room. He had not yet seen us, pressed as we were against the adjacent walls. Holmes did not hesitate. With the speed of a striking cobra, he lunged from the shadows. He brought the heavy barrel of his revolver down in a vicious arc, striking the intruder squarely on the wrist of the hand holding the knife. The man let out a muffled grunt of pain, and the knife clattered to the floorboards. But he was heavily built and highly trained. Instead of retreating, he threw his weight forward, slamming into Holmes. The two men crashed into the centre of the room, rolling over the Persian rug in a tangle of limbs. "Watson, the chimney!" Holmes shouted, straining against the brute's grip. I turned back to the fireplace just in time to see a second pair of boots drop into the grate. The cadre had sent 2 men. The second intruder was slighter, faster. He hit the floor and immediately drew a revolver, the cylinder clicking as he cocked the hammer. I raised my own weapon and fired. The roar of the heavy service revolver was deafening in the enclosed space of the sitting room. The muzzle flash illuminated the room in a strobe-like burst of yellow light. The bullet struck the brickwork just inches from the second man's head, showering him with dust. He cursed in a guttural foreign tongue, dropping to one knee and raising his weapon toward me. I fired again. This time the bullet took him in the shoulder. He spun backward, crashing into the coal scuttle, his gun firing wildly into the ceiling. Meanwhile, Holmes was engaged in a desperate struggle. His opponent had him pinned beneath him, hands scrabbling for Holmes's throat. Holmes, an expert in single-stick, boxing, and the obscure Japanese martial art of baritsu, used his opponent's momentum against him. Planting his feet against the man's abdomen, Holmes threw him over his head. The large man crashed heavily against the boarded-up window. Before he could recover, Holmes was upon him. A swift, decisive blow to the temple with the butt of the revolver, and the man slumped to the floor, unconscious. I kept my weapon trained on the second man, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder, leaning against the mantelpiece. "Drop it," I ordered, my voice ringing with an authority born of the battlefield. The man looked at his fallen comrade, then at the steady barrel of my gun. With a sneer of defiance, he let his revolver fall into the ashes of the grate. The silence that followed was ringing, broken only by the heavy breathing of the combatants and the smell of cordite and soot. Holmes stood up, brushing a thick layer of soot from his dressing gown, his face calm but his eyes shining with the thrill of the hunt. "Excellent shooting, Watson," he said, reaching out to light the gas lamp on the wall. The sudden illumination revealed a room in chaos. Furniture overturned, soot covering everything, and 2 dangerous foreign operatives neutralized on our carpet. "And your martial arts are as sharp as ever, Holmes," I replied, keeping my eyes on the wounded man. "Now," Holmes said, stepping over the unconscious giant and approaching the man by the fireplace. "You will tell us who orchestrated this infiltration, though I expect I already know. Colonel von Herling of the Prussian Secret Police, was it not?" The man glared at Holmes, his lips sealed tightly. "It matters little if you speak," Holmes said smoothly, retrieving the fallen trench knife and examining its blade. "You are caught in the act of burglary, attempted murder, and espionage." The British government will have a great many questions for you, and I assure you Mycroft's interrogators are far less polite than I." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, would you be so kind as to blow your police whistle out the window? The constabulary must be wondering what the shooting was about, and we have a package to deliver to Scotland Yard." An hour later the room had been cleared. Inspector Lestrade, looking thoroughly bewildered and slightly annoyed at being dragged from his bed, had taken the two operatives into custody. The magnitude of their crimes had assured Lestrade a commendation, provided he kept the political elements of the affair strictly out of the press. Holmes and I sat in the ruined sitting-room, the first light of a June dawn creeping through the gaps in the window shutters. The oppressive heat of the previous day had broken, and a cool, refreshing breeze swept through the open door. Holmes sat at the table, the sheet of transcribed musical notes in front of him. He carefully folded it and placed it into a heavy envelope, sealing it with wax. "A remarkable night, Watson," he murmured, pressing his seal into the hot wax. "A terrifying one," I corrected. "We were nearly murdered in our own home for a tune whistled by a messenger boy." "Ah, but what a tune," Holmes said softly. "This envelope, Watson, will go to Mycroft by special courier within the hour. By tomorrow evening the Mediterranean fleet will alter its course. The adversary's amalgamation will be intercepted before it can form. The balance of power will be maintained, and the Suez will remain open. All because a young boy with perfect pitch took a shortcut through a Whitehall alley. It is a fragile thread upon which the fate of empires hangs," I observed. "Indeed it is," Holmes agreed, rising and stretching his long limbs. "The grandest schemes of statesmen and generals can be undone by the smallest of variables. A broken monocle, a missed train, or in this case a district messenger with an ear for music. It is a humbling thought, Watson." He walked to his violin case, opened it, and gently lifted the Stradivarius. He tucked it beneath his chin, closed his eyes, and drew the bow across the strings. This time he did not play the chaotic, disjointed cipher of Count von Rittenberg. Instead he played a slow, mournful sonata, the notes rising sweet and pure in the cool morning air. It was a requiem for a murdered diplomat, a tribute to a brave messenger boy, and a gentle balm to soothe the frayed nerves of a long and perilous night. I leaned back in my chair, the tension finally draining from my muscles, and listened to the music, grateful once again for the singular privilege of sharing these adventures with the greatest mind of our time. Thank you for watching. Before you go, don't forget to check out our Patreon.